I stand in this packed courtroom, facing my own daughter across the aisle. She's accusing me of stealing her dead mother's inheritance. The judge asks for final evidence. I take a deep breath, pull out a flash drive, and speak the words that will change everything. Your Honor, please play this video. As the large screen flickers to life, every attorney in the room turns to stare at my daughter Sarah. Her face drains of color. She knows exactly what's coming. My name is Andy Davis, and I'm 65 years old. Until 6 months ago, I lived what most folks would call a blessed life in suburban Denver, Colorado. I was married to my beloved Margaret for 42 wonderful years before pancreatic cancer took her from me. We raised our daughter Sarah together in a 3-bedroom ranch house that's now worth about $400,000. Margaret ran a successful accounting practice, and I spent 38 years as a high school principal. Together, we built a comfortable middle-class life with $700,000 in savings, retirement accounts, and life insurance. Margaret's final months were the hardest of my life. I became her full-time caregiver, helping her with medications, cooking special meals her sensitive stomach could handle, and reading her favorite novels when she was too weak to hold the books herself. Sarah visited us weekly, but she always seemed distracted, checking her phone constantly and leaving early for what she called work obligations. I handled the funeral arrangements mostly alone, while Sarah dealt with what she described as urgent real estate deals in Boulder, where she worked as an agent. The grief nearly broke me. 42 years of shared memories, inside jokes, and quiet companionship suddenly reduced to an empty house and clothes I couldn't bear to donate. Margaret had left everything to me in a clearly written will, witnessed by our attorney and 2 neighbors. I thought that would be the end of our legal affairs, but I was wrong. 3 weeks after we buried Margaret, Sarah arrived at my door with a stranger. She introduced him as Harold Brennan, an attorney from downtown Denver. My heart sank as I realized this wasn't a condolence visit. Dad, we need to talk about Mother's assets, Sarah announced, her voice cold and businesslike. I have reason to believe you convinced her to cut me out of the inheritance while she was dying. I stared at my daughter in disbelief. Sarah, your mother left everything to me legally. The will was clear and witnessed. She made her own decisions. Harold Brennan stepped forward, briefcase in hand. Mr. Davis, my client has concerns about potential undue influence during your wife's final illness. We're prepared to contest the will in probate court. Undue influence? I repeated, feeling like someone had punched me in the stomach. I took care of your mother every single day. I never pressured her about anything except taking her medications and eating enough to keep her strength up. Sarah's eyes flashed with something I'd never seen before. Pure calculation. Dad, I know you manipulated her. Mother promised me half of everything years ago. She wouldn't have changed her mind unless someone convinced her to. I sat down heavily in Margaret's favorite armchair, overwhelmed by the accusation. Sarah, your mother made her will 5 years ago, long before she got sick. She updated it twice during our marriage, always leaving everything to me. That's what married couples do. Harold handed me a formal letter demanding complete financial disclosure of all assets, accounts, and transactions during Margaret's illness. The legal language was intimidating and cold, nothing like the warm conversations Margaret and I had shared about our future plans. This is insane, I whispered, more to myself than to them. Sarah, I'm your father. Why would I steal from you? Sarah stood up, smoothing her business suit. Because you're getting older, Dad, and older people make poor decisions about money. Mother was vulnerable, and you took advantage of that vulnerability. The cruelty in her voice cut deeper than any physical pain I'd ever experienced. This was my little girl, the child Margaret and I had raised with love and sacrifice. I remembered teaching her to ride a bicycle, helping with homework, cheering at her high school graduation. Now she stood in our living room treating me like a criminal. I won't let you get away with this, Sarah continued. Mother worked hard for that money, and half of it belongs to me. As they prepared to leave, Harold mentioned they'd be filing formal papers within the week. Sarah paused at the door, her expression softening slightly. For a moment, I hoped she might reconsider this terrible path. Dad, just admit what you did, and we can work something out. Otherwise, this is going to get very ugly very quickly. After they left, I sat in Margaret's chair for hours, surrounded by the silence that had become my constant companion. I thought about calling our attorney, but first I needed to understand how my relationship with Sarah had deteriorated so completely without my noticing. Then Sarah delivered her devastating blow. She reached into her purse and pulled out a handwritten note. I found this in Mother's personal papers, she announced, handing it to Harold, who passed it to me. The handwriting was definitely Margaret's, her distinctive loops and careful penmanship unmistakable. The note was dated just 2 weeks before Margaret died, and it read, "I've been thinking about Sarah's future, and I believe she deserves half of our assets when I'm gone. Andy has his pension and Social Security, but Sarah needs help establishing her independence. I intend to revise my will to reflect this decision." I stared at the paper, recognizing every curve and stroke of my wife's writing. My hands trembled as I read it again, searching for some sign that this wasn't authentic. But everything about it looked genuine. From the blue ink, Margaret preferred to the slight shakiness that had developed in her writing during her illness. "Where did you find this?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Sarah's smile was triumphant. "In Mother's jewelry box, folded inside her address book. She obviously wrote it when she realized she was dying but didn't have time to change the will officially." Harold took the note back, studying it carefully. "This handwriting sample will be crucial evidence in probate court. It clearly shows your wife's intent to leave half the estate to Sarah." I felt the world spinning around me. If this note was genuine, everything I thought I knew about Margaret's final wishes was wrong. Had she really wanted to change her will, but died before she could make it official? Had I been honoring a document that no longer reflected her true feelings? "I need time to process this," I managed to say. Sarah's expression hardened again. "Time is exactly what you don't have, Dad. I'm filing the contest tomorrow morning. I suggest you find yourself a good probate attorney because I'm prepared to take this as far as necessary." As they walked toward the door, Harold turned back. "Mr. Davis, I should mention that we're also prepared to present evidence of your controlling behavior during your wife's illness. Several witnesses can testify to your attempts to isolate Mrs. Davis from family and friends." The accusation hit me like a slap. I never isolated Margaret from anyone. I was protecting her from exhausting visitors when she needed rest. "That's not how others remember it," Sarah said coolly. "We'll let the court decide who's telling the truth." After they left, I held Margaret's note in my shaking hands, trying to make sense of this nightmare. The handwriting was perfect, too perfect to be forged. But the content felt wrong, completely unlike the Margaret I'd known and loved. She had always been decisive about financial matters, and she'd spoken clearly about her will multiple times over the years. I walked to our bedroom and opened Margaret's jewelry box, searching for any other notes or documents Sarah might have missed. Inside, I found Margaret's wedding ring, the one Sarah would inherit someday, along with her grandmother's pearl necklace and a few other family pieces. But no other papers, no additional clues about her final thoughts. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept replaying conversations from Margaret's last weeks, searching for any hint that she'd wanted to change her will. But all I could remember was her telling me how grateful she was for my care, and how much she loved me. She'd never mentioned Sarah needing additional financial support, or deserving half the estate. By morning, I'd made my decision. If Sarah wanted a fight, I'd give her one. But first, I needed to understand exactly what I was up against, and why my own daughter had declared war on me. I hired Patricia Walsh, a probate specialist my friend Tom recommended after he went through a difficult estate battle with his stepchildren. Patricia's office overlooked downtown Denver, and her walls were covered with certificates and awards from decades of legal practice. She listened patiently as I explained Sarah's accusations and showed her the handwritten note. "Andy, this is more complicated than I initially thought," Patricia said, adjusting her reading glasses. "Handwriting analysis, proving undue influence, gathering witness testimony. We're looking at a lengthy and expensive process." Within days, Sarah filed the formal probate contest, and my nightmare became public. The local newspaper picked up the story with the headline, "Local Principal Accused of Elder Abuse by Daughter." I couldn't walk into the grocery store without feeling people staring and whispering. Former colleagues from the high school avoided me at Margaret's favorite restaurant, unsure whether to believe the allegations. The legal maneuvering intensified quickly. Sarah brought forward Margaret's former nurse, Linda Rodriguez, who testified that I seemed overly controlling during medical appointments. According to Linda, I answered questions that Margaret should have answered herself and made decisions about her care without consulting her. I was protecting my wife from exhausting conversations when she was in pain, I explained to Patricia. The chemotherapy made her nauseated and confused sometimes. I was helping her communicate with medical staff, not controlling her. Sarah also presented Jessica Manning, her longtime friend, who claimed Margaret once confided that she felt pressured by me. Jessica testified that during a phone conversation 2 months before Margaret died, my wife had expressed concern about my increasing demands on her time and attention. "That's completely false," I told Patricia. "Margaret cherished her friendships and I encouraged her to maintain them. When she felt strong enough, I drove her to lunch dates and social events. I was her caregiver, not her captor. But Sarah's narrative was gaining traction. She provided phone records showing she'd called her mother daily during the illness, portraying herself as the devoted daughter who stayed connected while I isolated Margaret from family. The records didn't show the content of those calls or their duration, but they created an impression of constant, caring communication. My legal bills mounted rapidly. Patricia's fees reached $15,000 within the first month, and we were just getting started. She warned me that a full contested probate could cost $50,000 or more, potentially consuming a significant portion of the estate Sarah was trying to claim. "Andy, I need you to understand something," Patricia said during one particularly difficult meeting. "Sarah has also hired a forensic accountant to examine all your financial records during Margaret's illness. They're looking for any unusual transactions, large withdrawals, or suspicious activity." The invasion of privacy felt overwhelming. Strangers would be examining every check I'd written, every medical bill I'd paid, every purchase I'd made during the worst period of my life. They'd scrutinize grocery receipts, pharmacy payments, and utility bills, searching for evidence of financial manipulation. I began reflecting on Sarah's childhood behavior, looking for clues I might have missed. She'd always been manipulative, caught lying about grades and test scores throughout high school. Money had disappeared from Margaret's purse on several occasions, always with elaborate explanations about school expenses or emergency situations. Margaret and I had attributed this to typical teenage rebellion, but now I wondered if we'd been naive. Sarah's marriage to Derek had ended badly 3 years earlier. Margaret had confided her concerns about Sarah's gambling habit, which had contributed to the divorce. Sarah spent weekends at the casinos in Central City and Black Hawk, often returning home with stories about almost winning big or just needing one more chance to break even. "Sarah always wants what she can't have, Andy," Margaret had told me during one of our private conversations. "She's never learned to be content with what she has. She always thinks the next opportunity, the next relationship, the next gamble will solve all her problems." Now I realized Margaret's decision to leave everything to me had been deliberate and carefully considered. She'd worried that Sarah would waste an inheritance on gambling or other poor financial decisions. Margaret wanted to ensure I had security in my retirement years, while hoping Sarah would eventually mature and learn responsibility. But the handwriting expert delivered devastating news to Patricia. After examining the note for 2 weeks, conducting detailed analysis of pen pressure, letter formation, and writing rhythm, the expert concluded the note appeared completely authentic. Every characteristic matched Margaret's known handwriting samples, and there were no detectable signs of forgery. "This changes everything, Andy," Patricia warned. "If the note is genuine, Sarah's case becomes much stronger. We need to find other evidence to support your position, or you could lose everything." Patricia suggested we hire our own private investigator to examine Sarah's claims more closely. "We need to understand her financial situation, her relationship with Margaret during the illness, and whether there are any witnesses who can contradict her version of events." The recommendation felt like admitting defeat, but I agreed. If Sarah wanted to investigate my actions, I had every right to examine hers. I suspected there was more to this story than simple concern about Margaret's final wishes. That evening, I sat in Margaret's garden, watching the sunset paint the mountains purple and gold. She'd spent countless hours here, tending her roses and planting seasonal plantings. I remembered our conversations during her illness, when I'd wheel her outside on warm days so she could enjoy her flowers one last time. "I don't understand what Sarah wants from me," Margaret had said weakly, just a month before she died. "She calls every day asking about money, about the will, about what will happen to our assets. I've told her repeatedly that you'll be taken care of, and she'll inherit everything when you're gone. But she seems impatient, like she can't wait for me to die." Those words haunted me now. Margaret had been concerned about Sarah's fixation on inheritance matters, but I dismissed it as natural worry about her mother's declining health. Now I wondered if Sarah had been pressuring Margaret in ways I hadn't recognized. The investigation was about to reveal truths that would shock everyone involved, including me. Sarah's web of deception was far more elaborate than anyone suspected, and Margaret had been more aware of her daughter's manipulation than she'd ever let on. But first, Patricia received the most crushing news yet. The handwriting expert had completed additional analysis using advanced computer modeling and microscopic examination. The verdict was unanimous among 3 separate experts. Margaret's note was absolutely, unquestionably authentic. Every detail, from ink flow to pressure patterns, confirmed my wife had written those words 2 weeks before her death. I felt my world collapsing. If Margaret had truly wanted to change her will, then I was fighting against her genuine wishes. Maybe Sarah was right, and I had somehow influenced Margaret without realizing it. Maybe my grief and shock had blinded me to my wife's true feelings about her daughter's future. Patricia saw my despair and leaned forward intently. Andy, authentic handwriting doesn't necessarily mean authentic intent. We need to dig deeper into the circumstances surrounding this note. When was it written? Where? Who was present? There might be context we're missing. Her words offered a small spark of hope, but I felt like I was drowning in doubt and confusion. Everything I thought I knew about my marriage, my wife, and my daughter was being called into question. The woman I'd loved for 42 years had apparently harbored doubts about our financial arrangements that she'd never shared with me. But sometimes the truth hides in the most unexpected places, and our investigator was about to uncover evidence that would change everything once again. I decided to hire private investigator Robert Mills, a former Denver police detective with 25 years of experience in fraud cases. Robert's office was modest but professional, filled with filing cabinets and computer equipment that looked more sophisticated than anything I'd seen in television shows. Andy, I've handled dozens of family estate disputes, Robert explained during our first meeting. The key is following the money trail and understanding the real motivations behind these contests. Your daughter's financial situation will tell us a lot about why she's pursuing this claim so aggressively. Within a week, Robert uncovered information that stunned me. Sarah's gambling debts totaled over $80,000, far more than Derek had revealed during their divorce proceedings. She'd been frequenting casinos in Central City and Black Hawk for 2 years, but also owed money to private lenders who operated outside traditional banking systems. She's in serious trouble, Andy, Robert reported. Bank records show large cash withdrawals from her account during your wife's illness, sometimes $3,000 or $4,000 at a time. She's been using credit card advances to fund her gambling, and several cards are now maxed out. The revelation explained Sarah's constant phone calls to Margaret during the illness. She hadn't been offering emotional support to her dying mother. She'd been calculating her potential inheritance and growing desperate as medical bills consumed our savings. Robert also discovered something that provided crucial evidence in my favor. 6 months earlier, concerned about a series of neighborhood break-ins, I'd installed a comprehensive security system around our house. The system recorded continuously, capturing everything that happened in our common areas during Margaret's final weeks. Andy, you've got hours of footage showing your interactions with Margaret, Robert explained excitedly. If Sarah claims you were controlling or manipulative, this video evidence will contradict her testimony. Together, we reviewed dozens of hours of recordings. The footage showed me cooking Margaret's favorite foods, administering medications according to precise schedules, reading to her when she was too weak to hold books, and helping her stay connected with friends who called. There was no evidence of manipulation, coercion, or controlling behavior. Instead, the videos revealed a devoted husband providing gentle, loving care to his dying wife. In one particularly touching sequence, Margaret insisted on calling her brother James in Phoenix to discuss family matters. I helped her dial the number, then left the room to give her privacy. The video showed Margaret speaking animatedly for nearly an hour, clearly making her own decisions about the conversation's content and duration. This footage is gold, Patricia told me, when Robert shared his findings. Any jury watching these interactions will see genuine love and devotion, not manipulation or undue influence. But Robert's investigation uncovered even more compelling evidence. Margaret's oncologist, Dr. William Hayes, agreed to testify that my wife remained mentally sharp and capable of making decisions until her final week. Dr. Hayes had extensive notes documenting Margaret's clear thinking and independent decision-making throughout her treatment. Mrs. Davis was one of my most informed and engaged patients, Dr. Hayes explained to Patricia. She researched her condition extensively, asked detailed questions about treatment options, and made decisions based on careful consideration of the facts. Her husband was supportive, but never answered for her or pressured her about medical choices. Margaret's best friend, Clara Thompson, provided another crucial piece of the puzzle. Clara revealed that Sarah had called her repeatedly during Margaret's illness, asking detailed questions about Margaret's financial plans and expressing frustration about the will's contents. Sarah seemed obsessed with the inheritance, Clara told Robert. She kept asking if Margaret had mentioned changing the will or leaving her more money. I found it inappropriate to discuss financial matters while Margaret was fighting for her life. Clara remembered a specific conversation that proved devastating to Sarah's case. During one of their final phone calls, Margaret had expressed clear concerns about Sarah's lifestyle choices. Margaret told me exactly. I'm worried Sarah will gamble away everything Andy and I worked for. She needs to learn responsibility before she gets access to serious money, Clara testified. Margaret was very clear about wanting to protect your financial security, Andy. Margaret's brother James arrived from Phoenix to support my case. As Margaret's only sibling, his testimony carried significant weight with the probate court. James confirmed that Margaret had never expressed any intention to leave Sarah 50% of the estate. Margaret was always practical about money, James explained. She told me several times that Andy would inherit everything, and Sarah would get her share when Andy passed away. Margaret thought this arrangement made sense because Andy would need resources for his remaining years, while Sarah was young enough to build her own financial security. James also recalled family dinner conversations where Margaret had expressed disappointment about Sarah's gambling problem and financial irresponsibility. Margaret loved Sarah deeply, but she wasn't blind to her daughter's problems. She hoped Sarah would mature and learn better financial habits over time. Meanwhile, Sarah's legal position was weakening in other ways. After Harold Brennan withdrew from the case upon learning about Sarah's deception regarding the note, she struggled to find competent replacement counsel. She finally hired Kevin Murphy, a young attorney with limited probate experience who seemed overwhelmed by the case's complexity. Sarah's public relations campaign was also backfiring. Her tearful television interview about elder abuse epidemic generated initial sympathy, but viewers began questioning her credibility as more facts emerged. Social media comments shifted from support to skepticism as people learned about her gambling debts and previous financial troubles. The harassment escalated when I received threatening anonymous phone calls suggesting I do the right thing and split the inheritance with Sarah. Robert traced these calls to Marcus Webb, Sarah's current boyfriend, who had a criminal record including fraud and intimidation charges. Your daughter is surrounding herself with the wrong kind of people, Robert warned. This Marcus character has been in and out of jail for various scams and con games. He's probably encouraging Sarah's legal challenge, hoping to benefit from any settlement. Sarah even attempted to enter our family home with a locksmith, claiming she had inheritance rights that allowed her access to Margaret's personal belongings. I filed a police report, and officers explained that probate proceedings didn't grant her any right to enter the property without my permission. But Robert's most shocking discovery was yet to come. Bank security footage from the day Margaret supposedly wrote the handwritten note revealed something that changed everything. The timestamp on the note showed it was dated during Margaret's final hospital stay, when she was unconscious and heavily sedated with morphine for pain management. The bank's surveillance system showed Sarah visiting that branch on the exact date in question, but Margaret was definitely not with her. Andy, your wife was in the hospital, unconscious, on the day this note was supposedly written, Robert explained, showing me the medical records and bank footage side by side. There's no way Margaret could have written this note when and where Sarah claims she found it. Patricia immediately confronted Harold Brennan with this evidence before he withdrew from the case. Faced with proof that his client had lied about crucial evidence, Harold's ethical obligations required him to end their attorney-client relationship immediately. Sarah has been playing an elaborate game from the beginning, Patricia told me. The question now is how deep this deception goes and what other evidence she might have fabricated. The investigation was about to reveal that Margaret had been more aware of Sarah's manipulation attempts than anyone realized. My beloved wife had been protecting me even during her final days, gathering evidence that would eventually prove crucial to preserving the life we'd built together. But first, we needed to understand how Sarah had managed to forge Margaret's handwriting so perfectly that multiple experts initially deemed it authentic. The answer would lead us to discoveries that shocked even Robert, who thought he'd seen every type of family betrayal imaginable. Patricia immediately confronted Sarah's attorney with the bank security footage evidence, presenting timestamps that proved Margaret was unconscious in the hospital when the note was allegedly written. Harold Brennan's face went pale as he realized the implications of representing a client who had fabricated crucial evidence. I cannot ethically continue this representation, Harold announced, within hours of seeing the footage. My client has not been forthright about material facts, and I must withdraw from the case immediately. Sarah scrambled to find new legal representation, but word of Harold's withdrawal spread quickly through Denver's legal community. Most experienced probate attorneys refused to take a case involving potential evidence fabrication. She finally hired Kevin Murphy, a recent law school graduate with minimal trial experience who seemed desperate for any paying client. I felt vindicated by this revelation, but Patricia warned that we'd only scratched the surface of Sarah's deception. Andy, The question now is how she managed to forge Margaret's handwriting so perfectly that multiple experts initially authenticated it. That level of skill suggests extensive planning and practice. Robert Mills interviewed Sarah's childhood friend, Nancy Williams, who provided disturbing insights into Sarah's history of forgery and deception. Nancy reluctantly admitted that Sarah had been forging signatures since high school, creating fake parental permission slips and altering report cards with remarkable skill. Sarah practiced copying her mother's signature for hours, Nancy revealed. She told me it was just for school stuff, but looking back, I think she was developing a skill she planned to use later. She was always talking about getting access to her parents' money. The revelation became more troubling when Nancy described a specific incident from 5 years earlier. Sarah had forged Margaret's signature on a personal loan application for $5,000 from a local bank. When Margaret discovered the fraud, she quietly paid off the loan, rather than pressing charges against her own daughter. Mrs. Davis was heartbroken, Nancy remembered. She told my mother that Sarah had betrayed her trust, but she couldn't bear the thought of her daughter going to jail. She made Sarah promise never to forge her signature again, but obviously that promise didn't last. Robert's investigation of the hospital staff revealed additional evidence of Sarah's suspicious behavior during Margaret's final weeks. Nurse supervisor Carol Jenkins recalled multiple incidents where Sarah visited Margaret alone during late-night shifts, always claiming she wanted to organize Mother's things to help Dad. "We found her going through Mrs. Davis's personal belongings several times," Carol testified. Her purse, her jewelry box, even her medical charts, when she thought no one was looking. Sarah always had an explanation, but her behavior seemed secretive and inappropriate. Hospital security footage showed Sarah leaving with several of Margaret's personal items, including her checkbook and address book. Sarah had told the nursing staff that I'd given her permission to take these items home for safekeeping, but I'd never authorized any such action. The emotional impact of these discoveries nearly broke me. I sat in Patricia's office, overwhelmed by the extent of Sarah's betrayal, struggling to understand how the little girl I'd raised had become capable of such calculated deception. "Andy, you need to understand something," Patricia said gently. "This isn't about you failing as a father. Some people develop antisocial tendencies regardless of their upbringing. Sarah's behavior shows a pattern of manipulation and deceit that probably started years before you recognized it." Robert then uncovered the most devastating evidence yet. Sarah had sold Margaret's wedding ring, a family heirloom worth $12,000, just 3 weeks after the funeral. The jewelry store owner, David Richardson, confirmed that Sarah had brought the ring to his shop with a forged authorization letter claiming I'd given her permission to sell it. "She seemed nervous and rushed," David remembered. "When I asked about the authorization letter, she got defensive and said her father was too grief-stricken to handle the transaction himself. Something felt wrong, but the letter looked official." I held Margaret's empty jewelry box, remembering how she'd worn that ring every day of our marriage. It had belonged to her grandmother, passed down through 3 generations of strong women. Sarah had sold this irreplaceable piece of family history to fund her gambling addiction, then lied about having permission. "I'm sorry, Andy," Patricia said softly. "I know this must be incredibly painful, but we need to document every instance of Sarah's deception to build the strongest possible case." Sarah's response to these mounting accusations became increasingly desperate. Facing certain defeat in court, she contacted local media, claiming she had explosive new evidence of my misconduct. At a staged press conference, Sarah tearfully accused me of forging the bank surveillance footage and manipulating evidence through connections in law enforcement. "My father has friends in the police department from his years as a school principal," Sarah claimed, without any supporting evidence. "They're helping him create fake evidence to steal my mother's inheritance. This is a conspiracy to cover up elder abuse." Her boyfriend, Marcus Webb, supported these wild allegations, suggesting I had sophisticated technology and criminal contacts capable of manufacturing false evidence. Their claims became increasingly outlandish and paranoid, undermining what little credibility Sarah had remaining. A social media campaign began with the hashtag #JusticeForMargaret, featuring Sarah as a grieving daughter victimized by a manipulative father. But public opinion quickly turned against her as details of her gambling debts and forged documents became public knowledge. I received dozens of hate messages from strangers who believed Sarah's public narrative, but I also got support from people who recognized the signs of a sophisticated con game. Former students from my years as a principal wrote letters defending my character and describing the values I'd tried to instill in young people. But Robert's investigation was about to uncover the most shocking evidence of all. While examining Margaret's personal belongings, he discovered something that changed everything we thought we knew about her final weeks. Margaret had been secretly recording conversations on her smartphone during the last month of her life. She'd suspected something was wrong with Sarah's behavior and wanted to protect me from potential accusations after her death. The phone contained dozens of audio files, including conversations where Sarah pressured Margaret to change her will and admitted to lying about her gambling debts. "Andy, your wife was trying to gather evidence to protect you," Robert explained as we prepared to listen to the recordings. "She knew Sarah was being deceptive, and she wanted proof of what was really happening." Margaret's weak but determined voice came through the phone's speaker. "Sarah keeps asking about money, Andy? She thinks I don't see through her lies, but I've been her mother for 38 years. I know when she's trying to manipulate me." One recording captured Sarah pleading with Margaret. "Mom, I'm in serious trouble. The people I owe money to aren't patient like bank loan officers. They're going to hurt me if I don't pay them soon." Margaret's response was firm despite her physical weakness. "Sarah, you've been lying to me about your gambling problem for years. I can't enable this destructive behavior anymore. You need professional help, not more money to waste." The recordings revealed the true extent of Sarah's desperation and Margaret's awareness of her daughter's manipulation attempts. My beloved wife had been fighting two battles during her final weeks, against the cancer that was killing her, and against the daughter who was trying to exploit her vulnerability. But the most devastating recording was yet to come. 5 days before Margaret died, she made one final audio file that would prove crucial to the court case. In a voice weakened by illness but clear in purpose, Margaret explicitly stated her reasons for leaving everything to me and her deep disappointment in Sarah's choices. This evidence would finally reveal the full truth about Margaret's final wishes and Sarah's elaborate scheme to steal an inheritance she'd never been promised. The recordings would prove that Margaret had been far more aware of Sarah's deception than any of us had realized, and that she'd taken steps to protect me, even when she could barely speak above a whisper. Margaret's smartphone contained audio files that shattered every assumption about her final weeks. With trembling hands, I listened to my beloved wife's voice, weakened by illness, but strong in conviction, as she documented Sarah's increasingly desperate attempts at manipulation. "Testing, testing," Margaret whispered in the first recording, dated exactly 1 month before her death. "Andy doesn't know I'm recording these conversations, but I need evidence of what Sarah is really doing. If something happens to me before I can protect him, maybe these recordings will help." The next file captured a phone conversation between Margaret and Sarah from 3 weeks before Margaret died. Sarah's voice was demanding and impatient. "Mom, you need to think about my future. Dad's going to be fine with his pension and Social Security, but I need help establishing financial independence." Margaret's response was weaker but firm. "Sarah, we've discussed this repeatedly. Everything goes to Andy when I die, and you'll inherit when he passes away. That's how marriage works. Spouses take care of each other first." "That's not fair, Mom," Sarah argued. "I'm your daughter. I should get half of everything now, while it can make a real difference in my life. Dad doesn't need all that money sitting around collecting dust." The pain in Margaret's voice was obvious. "Sarah, you're 38 years old. You should be building your own financial security through work and responsible choices, not waiting for inheritance money." More devastating recordings revealed the true extent of Sarah's gambling addiction and financial desperation. In one conversation, Sarah broke down and admitted the scope of her debts. "Mom, I owe people serious money. Not just credit cards or bank loans. Dangerous people who don't accept payment plans." Margaret's shock was evident. "Sarah Elizabeth Davis, exactly how much do you owe?" "Over $80,000, Sarah whispered, "and the interest keeps growing every week. Some of these people aren't patient like legitimate lenders, Mom. They've threatened to hurt me if I don't pay." Margaret's response showed both love and disappointment. "Sarah, how could you let things get this bad? We raised you to be responsible with money, to understand the difference between needs and wants." Sarah's voice became manipulative. "Mom, you and Dad have always had everything you needed. You don't understand what it's like to struggle financially, to feel like everyone else has opportunities you don't get." "That's not true, Sarah," Margaret replied with surprising strength. "Your father and I worked for 40 years to build what we have. We made sacrifices, lived below our means, and saved for the future. We offered to help you many times, but you always wanted handouts instead of guidance." The recordings revealed Margaret's growing awareness of Sarah's deception. In one particularly painful conversation, Sarah tried to convince Margaret that I was planning to remarry after her death. "Mom, Dad's been talking to Betty Carlson next door a lot lately," Sarah lied smoothly. "I think he's already planning to move on after you're gone." Do you really want some other woman enjoying the money you worked so hard to earn? Margaret's anger was immediate and fierce. Sarah Elizabeth, how dare you lie about your father like that? Andy has been devoted to me for 42 years. He's sacrificing his health to take care of me, sleeping in a chair beside my bed, giving up everything to be my caregiver. Sarah's response revealed her desperation. Mom, you're not thinking clearly. The cancer medication is affecting your judgment. You need to protect yourself and your daughter while you still can. Margaret's final words in that conversation were devastating. My mind is perfectly clear, Sarah, and I see exactly who you've become. You're trying to manipulate a dying woman to fund your gambling addiction. I'm ashamed of what you're doing. One recording captured Sarah's admission about stealing from her real estate clients' escrow accounts. During a particularly desperate moment, she confessed to using client funds to make payments to loan sharks. I borrowed $50,000 from client escrow accounts, Sarah admitted. I was going to put it back after I won big at the casino, but I kept losing. Now the real estate commission is starting an investigation. Margaret's horror was palpable. Sarah, you could go to prison for stealing client money. You've become everything I raised you not to be: dishonest, irresponsible, and criminal. I'm not a criminal, Mom, Sarah protested. I'm just someone who made some bad choices and needs family support to get back on track. Bad choices? Margaret's voice cracked with emotion. You've been lying to me for years, stealing from clients, gambling away money that doesn't belong to you. These aren't mistakes, Sarah. This is a pattern of criminal behavior. The recordings also captured conversations with Sarah's loan shark, a man named Tommy Mariotti, who operated outside traditional banking systems. Sarah mentioned owing him $50,000 at 30% annual interest, with penalty clauses that increased the debt dramatically if payments were missed. Tommy's not going to wait much longer, Sarah told Margaret during one desperate phone call. He's already sent people to my apartment twice to remind me about the payments. I'm scared, Mom. Margaret's response showed both concern and frustration. Sarah, these are the consequences of your choices. You've put yourself in danger because you couldn't control your gambling urges. But the most devastating recording was Margaret's final message, created just 2 days before she died. Speaking directly into her phone's microphone, Margaret addressed Sarah with the clarity and strength that had defined her character throughout our marriage. Sarah, if you're hearing this recording, it means you've tried to hurt your father after I'm gone, Margaret's voice whispered with unmistakable resolve. I've documented your attempts to manipulate me, your lies about your gambling addiction, and your threats to contest my will if you don't get money immediately. Margaret continued with growing strength. I want you to know that every decision in my will was made with complete mental clarity and careful consideration. I'm leaving everything to Andy because he's earned it through 4 decades of partnership, love, and sacrifice. The recording concluded with Margaret's most powerful statement. The proof of your deception is in the home office safe, Sarah. The combination is your father's birthday, the man you're trying to steal from. I've kept detailed records of your lies, your gambling debts, and your attempts to pressure me while I was dying. I loved you enough to give you one last chance to be honest, but you chose greed over truth. As we listened to these heartbreaking recordings, I realized Margaret had been protecting me, even when she could barely speak above a whisper. She'd known exactly what Sarah was planning, and had gathered evidence to defend me against accusations she knew were coming. Patricia reviewed each recording carefully, taking detailed notes about times, dates, and specific admissions. Andy, this evidence is devastating to Sarah's case. She's admitted to forgery, theft from clients, lying about her debts, and attempting to manipulate her dying mother. Robert Mills connected the audio evidence to his other findings, creating a comprehensive picture of Sarah's deception. The recordings prove that Margaret was mentally competent and aware of Sarah's manipulation attempts. No court will believe Sarah's claims about undue influence after hearing her mother's own words. But we still needed to follow Margaret's final clue. The home office safe contained additional evidence that would complete the picture of Sarah's betrayal and provide the final proof needed for our court case. Following Margaret's instructions, I opened the safe using my birthday as the combination. Inside, we found documentation that would change everything and provide the absolute proof of Sarah's elaborate scheme to steal an inheritance she'd never been promised. The probate court hearing was scheduled for a Tuesday morning in late November, almost 7 months after Margaret's death. Judge Raymond Martinez, a respected jurist with 25 years of experience in family law, presided over a packed courtroom. Word had spread through the legal community about the dramatic evidence in our case, and several attorneys attended to observe the proceedings. Sarah arrived looking disheveled and exhausted. She'd spent the previous night in county jail after being arrested on check fraud charges filed by 3 of her real estate clients who'd discovered missing escrow funds. Her current boyfriend, Marcus, was nowhere to be seen, having distanced himself as Sarah's legal troubles mounted. Patricia presented our evidence methodically, starting with the bank surveillance footage that proved Margaret was unconscious in the hospital when the alleged inheritance note was supposedly written. The forged document that had initially seemed so damaging to our case was now revealed as elaborate fraud. "Your Honor," Patricia announced with quiet confidence, "we will demonstrate that the contestant has engaged in a systematic campaign of deception, forgery, and manipulation in an attempt to steal an inheritance she was never promised." I testified first, describing my 42-year marriage to Margaret and the loving care I provided during her final illness. I spoke about Margaret's clear mental state, her independent decision-making throughout her treatment, and the detailed conversations we'd had about our financial plans and her will. Margaret never expressed any desire to change her will or leave half the estate to Sarah, I testified honestly. She was concerned about Sarah's gambling addiction and financial irresponsibility. She wanted to ensure I would have security in my remaining years. Sarah's attorney, Kevin Murphy, cross-examined me aggressively, trying to paint me as a controlling husband who isolated Margaret from her daughter. But his inexperience showed as he failed to establish any evidence supporting these accusations. "Mr. Davis, isn't it true that you prevented your wife from having private conversations with her daughter during her illness?" Kevin demanded. "That's completely false," I replied calmly. "Margaret spoke with Sarah daily by phone, often for an hour or more. I encouraged these conversations because they seemed to lift Margaret's spirits." Patricia then presented the security camera footage from our home, showing dozens of hours of my interactions with Margaret during her final weeks. The videos clearly demonstrated gentle, loving care, without any evidence of manipulation or control. Judge Martinez watched intently as the footage showed me reading to Margaret, helping her with medications, and supporting her during phone calls with friends and family. Dr. William Hayes testified about Margaret's mental competency throughout her illness. Mrs. Davis remained alert and capable of making complex decisions until her final week. Her husband was supportive but never interfered with her medical choices or decision-making process. Clara Thompson's testimony proved devastating to Sarah's case. Margaret's best friend described Sarah's repeated calls, asking about inheritance matters, and Margaret's explicit concerns about Sarah's gambling addiction. "Margaret told me directly that she was worried Sarah would waste any inheritance on gambling," Clara testified. "She said, 'I'm not going to fund my daughter's destruction by giving her access to money she'll lose at the casino.'" Margaret's brother James flew in from Phoenix, specifically to support our case. His testimony confirmed that Margaret had never expressed any intention to change her will or leave half the estate to Sarah. "My sister was always practical about financial matters," James explained. "She told me several times that Andy would inherit everything first, and Sarah would get her share when Andy passed away." Margaret thought this arrangement protected both of them. Then Patricia played the audio recordings Margaret had secretly made during her final month. The courtroom fell silent, as Margaret's weak but determined voice filled the room, describing Sarah's manipulation attempts and gambling addiction. The most powerful recording captured Sarah admitting she owed over $80,000 to dangerous lenders and had stolen money from real estate client accounts. Margaret's response was heartbreaking. "Sarah, you've become everything I raised you not to be." Judge Martinez listened intently to every word, occasionally taking notes as the recordings revealed the extent of Sarah's deception. Several people in the courtroom wiped away tears as Margaret's final recording played, her voice growing stronger as she defended her husband against accusations she knew were coming. Sarah took the witness stand in her own defense, but her testimony quickly unraveled. Kevin Murphy had little experience coaching witnesses, and Sarah's answers became increasingly contradictory and desperate. "I never tried to manipulate my mother," Sarah claimed. "Those recordings were taken out of context. I was just trying to have honest conversations about family finances." Patricia's cross-examination was devastating. Armed with evidence of Sarah's gambling debts, forged documents, and theft from clients, Patricia systematically dismantled every aspect of Sarah's testimony. "Miss Davis, you testified that you never lied to your mother about your gambling debts, but we have recordings of you admitting to owing over $80,000 after previously telling her you'd stopped gambling completely. Were you lying then, or are you lying now?" Sarah's response was weak and unconvincing. "I didn't want to worry my dying mother with the full extent of my financial problems." "So you admit you lied to your dying mother about your debts, while simultaneously pressuring her to change her will in your favor?" Sarah's desperation became obvious as she claimed the audio recordings were somehow fake, generated by artificial intelligence technology. When Patricia pressed her for technical details about how such sophisticated fraud could have been accomplished, Sarah couldn't provide any coherent explanation. Finally, the moment arrived for our most dramatic evidence. Following Margaret's instructions from her final recording, we had opened the home office safe using my birthday as the combination. Inside, we found Margaret's detailed journal, documenting 5 years of Sarah's lies and manipulation attempts. But Margaret had prepared one final surprise that would end this battle definitively. Hidden behind the journal was a video camera Margaret had purchased online and secretly installed in our bedroom. She'd recorded herself 3 days before her death, creating a final video message that would speak from beyond the grave. "Your Honor," I announced, standing up with the flash drive containing Margaret's final video. "My wife left one last piece of evidence. Please play this video." As the courtroom's large screen flickered to life, every attorney in the room turned to stare at Sarah. Her face drained of all color, because she knew exactly what was coming. Margaret appeared on screen, sitting in her favorite bedroom chair, wearing the blue robe I'd bought for her birthday. Though weakened by illness, her eyes were clear, and her voice was strong as she looked directly into the camera. "If this video is being played in court, my daughter Sarah has chosen greed over truth," Margaret began, her words carrying the weight of absolute moral authority. The courtroom was completely silent as Margaret continued. "Sarah, you've had countless opportunities to be honest about your gambling addiction and financial troubles. Instead, you've chosen to lie, manipulate, and steal. You've even tried to turn me against the man who's been my partner and best friend for 42 years. Margaret held up legal documents. "I've consulted with 3 different attorneys to ensure my will is ironclad and reflects my true wishes. Every dollar Andy inherits was earned through decades of love, sacrifice, and partnership." Her final words were addressed directly to me. "Andy, you were my greatest blessing. Don't let anyone make you feel guilty for inheriting what we built together. You've earned every penny through 42 years of devotion." As the video ended, the silence in the courtroom was deafening. Judge Martinez was visibly moved by Margaret's dignity and clarity. Sarah sat at the defendant's table with tears streaming down her face, finally understanding the full extent of her mother's awareness and disappointment. But our courtroom victory was about to be overshadowed by news that would change Sarah's situation dramatically. A court bailiff approached Judge Martinez with an urgent message that would reveal just how deep Sarah's criminal behavior had become. The bailiff whispered something that caused Judge Martinez to call for a brief recess. When court resumed, the judge announced that the state attorney general's office had filed additional criminal charges against Sarah. She was facing federal charges for mail fraud and money laundering through her real estate schemes, with potential prison time of up to 20 years. Sarah's elaborate plan to steal my inheritance had not only failed completely, but had also exposed her to criminal prosecution that would destroy what remained of her life. The daughter I'd raised with love and sacrifice had chosen a path that led to complete ruin, and there was nothing I could do to save her from the consequences of her own choices. Judge Martinez delivered his verdict with the gravity befitting such a clear-cut case of attempted inheritance fraud. His words rang through the packed courtroom with absolute authority and moral clarity. The evidence presented in this case reveals a systematic campaign of deception, forgery, and attempted manipulation by the contestant, Judge Martinez announced. Mrs. Davis's own words, recorded in her final weeks, demonstrate beyond any doubt that she was mentally competent and fully aware of her daughter's attempts at coercion. The judge continued with obvious conviction. "The original will stands as written. Mr. Andrew Davis is the sole legal heir to his wife's estate, and the contestant's claims are hereby dismissed with prejudice." But Judge Martinez wasn't finished. He ordered Sarah to pay all of my legal fees, which had reached $38,000. Additionally, he recommended that the district attorney's office investigate Sarah for perjury and attempted elder abuse, adding to her mounting legal troubles. "This court cannot ignore the serious criminal behavior that has been exposed during these proceedings," the judge stated firmly. "Forging documents, lying under oath, and attempting to defraud a grieving widower represent serious felonies that demand prosecution." Sarah was immediately taken into custody by court bailiffs. The state attorney general's office had filed a comprehensive indictment charging her with multiple federal crimes: mail fraud for using falsified inheritance documents, money laundering through her real estate schemes, and wire fraud for electronically transferring stolen client funds. Her real estate license was permanently revoked, and the Colorado Bar Association opened an investigation into Kevin Murphy's representation of a client who had knowingly presented false evidence. Within days, 17 of Sarah's former clients filed civil lawsuits seeking damages for stolen escrow funds totaling over $100,000. The local newspaper that had initially portrayed me as a potential elder abuser published a front-page retraction and formal apology. The headline read, "Daughter's Inheritance Fraud Exposed. Grieving Widower Vindicated." The article detailed Margaret's secret recordings and video evidence, completely reversing the earlier negative coverage. I received hundreds of letters from community members expressing support and apologizing for doubting my character. Former students from my years as a high school principal wrote heartfelt messages about the values I'd tried to teach them. Margaret's favorite charity received donations in her honor from neighbors who felt guilty for believing Sarah's initial accusations. The high school where I'd worked for 38 years established the Margaret Davis Memorial Scholarship for students overcoming family adversity. The scholarship would help young people who, unlike Sarah, were determined to build better lives despite difficult circumstances. 6 months after the trial, Sarah completed a court-ordered gambling addiction treatment program in the county jail. She wrote me a letter expressing what appeared to be genuine remorse for her actions, though I remained cautious about her sincerity, given her history of manipulation. "Dad, I destroyed everything Mom built and everything you deserved," Sarah wrote from her cell. "The gambling addiction clouded my judgment, but that doesn't excuse the lies, the forgery, or the cruelty I showed you during the worst period of your life." She continued, with what seemed like authentic self-reflection. "Mom was right about everything. I was so focused on what I thought I deserved that I couldn't see what I was throwing away. I lost my family, my career, my home, and my freedom because I couldn't accept responsibility for my own choices." Reading her letter in Margaret's garden, surrounded by the roses my wife had tended for decades, I felt a complex mixture of sadness and hope. Part of me wanted to believe Sarah had genuinely changed, but Margaret's warnings about our daughter's manipulative abilities echoed in my memory. 2 years after the trial, Sarah was released from federal prison after serving 18 months for fraud and money laundering. She'd completed additional addiction counseling and was working part-time at a nonprofit organization helping other people struggling with gambling addiction. When Sarah requested a supervised meeting at a family counseling center, I agreed after consulting with Patricia and my therapist. The woman who sat across from me looked older and more subdued than the demanding, entitled person who had tried to steal my inheritance. "Dad, I don't expect forgiveness," Sarah began quietly. "I just wanted you to know that I understand what I did was unforgivable. I tried to steal from you while you were grieving Mom's death. I attacked your character and made your worst period even more painful." Her words seemed genuine, but I remained guarded. "Sarah, your mother loved you deeply, despite everything. She hoped you would eventually find your way back to the values we tried to teach you." Sarah nodded, tears filling her eyes. "I know Mom documented everything to protect you, not to hurt me. She gave me countless chances to be honest, and I chose deception every time. I'm grateful she left evidence that proved your innocence." Our conversation lasted 2 hours, with the counselor helping us navigate decades of hurt and disappointment. Sarah didn't ask for money, housing, or any other assistance. She seemed focused on making amends through changed behavior rather than empty promises. I began visiting Sarah monthly, always in supervised settings, watching carefully for signs of genuine transformation versus continued manipulation. Slowly, cautiously, we rebuilt some form of relationship based on honesty about our shared past and realistic expectations for the future. Sarah started making small restitution payments to her former real estate clients, working 2 jobs to slowly repay the money she'd stolen. She attended weekly addiction support meetings and volunteered at a senior center, helping elderly people protect themselves from financial scams. 3 years after Margaret's death, I sold our family home and moved to a smaller condominium near the park where Margaret used to walk our dog. The proceeds from the house sale allowed me to establish a legal defense fund helping other seniors facing family financial exploitation. I began speaking at elder abuse prevention seminars throughout Colorado, sharing my story to help other families recognize the warning signs of inheritance fraud. Margaret's secret recordings had become a powerful tool for educating people about the importance of documenting their final wishes and protecting themselves from manipulative relatives. The victim advocacy work gave me purpose during the difficult process of rebuilding my life without Margaret. I helped dozens of seniors navigate probate disputes, gathered evidence of family fraud, and connected them with competent legal representation. My friendship with Patricia Walsh evolved into a professional partnership. We developed educational materials about estate planning and inheritance protection that were distributed by senior centers throughout the state. Margaret's story had become a cautionary tale that helped other families avoid similar betrayals. 5 years after the trial, I reflected on the painful journey that had tested everything I believed about family, loyalty, and justice. Margaret's final gift hadn't just been the evidence that protected our estate, it had been her demonstration that love sometimes requires setting firm boundaries and refusing to enable destructive behavior. I understood now that Margaret's decision to leave everything to me wasn't about punishing Sarah, but about protecting both of us from the consequences of our daughter's addiction and poor choices. Margaret had hoped that denying Sarah immediate access to large amounts of money might force her to address her gambling problem and develop personal responsibility. Standing in my garden at sunset, reading letters from scholarship recipients who had overcome family challenges through education and hard work, I looked up at Margaret's photograph on my kitchen table and whispered, "We did it right, sweetheart. Truth won." The video footage that had saved my inheritance was now being used to train social workers and legal advocates to recognize elder abuse. Margaret's courage in documenting Sarah's manipulation had protected not just me, but countless other families facing similar betrayals. I had learned that fighting for justice sometimes means standing up to the people who should love you most. Margaret's recordings had taught me that real love requires honesty, boundaries, and the courage to say no when someone you care about is making destructive choices. Sarah continued her recovery journey, and our relationship remained cautious but genuine. She understood that earning back trust would be a lifelong process, not a destination. Most importantly, she finally accepted responsibility for her choices, without blaming addiction, circumstances, or other people for her criminal behavior. As I watched the sun set over the mountains Margaret and I had loved together, I felt grateful for the truth that had ultimately prevailed. The inheritance Sarah had tried to steal was being used exactly as Margaret and I had planned, to support my remaining years with dignity and to help other families protect themselves from similar betrayals. Margaret's legacy lived on through every senior citizen who learned to document their wishes, every family that recognized manipulation before it destroyed their relationships, and every person who chose truth over convenience when facing difficult family dynamics. The woman I'd loved for 42 years had protected me, even from her deathbed, proving that genuine love endures beyond death, and that justice, though sometimes delayed, ultimately prevails when good people refuse to surrender to those who would exploit their grief and vulnerability. Have you ever faced a situation where someone close to you tried to take advantage during your most vulnerable moment? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below about how families can protect themselves from inheritance disputes and financial manipulation. Please hit the like button if this story resonated with you, subscribe for more real-life stories about overcoming family betrayals, and share this video with anyone who might benefit from Margaret's wisdom about setting boundaries with difficult family members. Thank you for listening to my story. And remember that sometimes the greatest act of love is refusing to enable someone's destructive choices, even when that someone is your own child. May you find the courage to stand up for truth when it matters most.